The first few seconds told me everything was about to turn ugly, because nobody who actually belongs on my land ever barrels up my gravel road like that. I was crouched between rows of tomatoes that morning. The real kind. Thick-skinned heirlooms my grandfather once smuggled home in his lunch pail decades ago. When the sound reached me, tires grinding into gravel like they had something to prove. Too loud, too sure of themselves. The kind of driving that says whoever's behind the wheel already decided this place doesn't really belong to me. I looked up just in time to see a white luxury SUV crest the hill, sunlight flashing off the hood, dust rolling behind it like it was making a statement. And I remember thinking, clear as day, calm as can be, here we go. The vehicle didn't slow until the last moment, screeching to a stop right at the edge of my garden. Close enough that one bad bounce would have wiped out tomatoes. My family's been growing since before paved roads ever reached this valley. The engine stayed running, humming like it was irritated just to be here. Then the door opened. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd wandered off the pages of a glossy magazine. Perfect blazer, pearl earrings, sunglasses big enough to hide behind, heels that sank straight into the dirt like the ground itself took offense. She scanned my farm the way people look at a mess they assume someone else is responsible for cleaning. No introduction, no attempt to come closer. She just called out from beside her car, "Mr. Pale." She said, crisp and sharp, like she'd rehearsed it, "We need to talk." That was my first real face-to-face with Margaret Linton, president of the Willow Creek Heights Homeowners Association, and the woman who would spend the next several months trying to convince me that land my family had worked for 5 generations was suddenly subject to her approval. I stood up slow, wiped my hands on my jeans, feeling every one of my 54 years settle into my lower back, and said, "You're on private property." She smiled like she'd been expecting that. "I've sent multiple notices to your mailbox regarding compliance issues. Since you've chosen to ignore them, I thought a personal visit might be more effective." Compliance issues. She said it like a medical diagnosis. "As I've already explained in writing," I replied, keeping my voice level, "my property isn't part of your HOA. Never was." Her smile tightened. "That's no longer accurate. The town approved an expanded jurisdiction last month. Your operation now falls within community standards." Operation. That word landed wrong. Like my family farm was some temporary nuisance instead of the reason half this valley still had open space. Behind her, past the SUV, I could see brand new rooftops rising over my eastern fence line. Willow Creek Heights. Stone entry signs. Perfect lawns. Identical mailboxes. Built fast. Sold faster. They'd arrive like a flood, and suddenly my land was inconvenient. "This land's been agricultural since 1891. I said, "Protected status. You can't just vote that away." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "According to our legal counsel." I was at the council meeting. I cut in. "You weren't." That pause, half a beat, but it told me everything. Her voice cooled. "The amendment allows rezoning of adjacent properties for future development. And this property isn't future anything." I said, pointing the fence behind her car. "Your authority ends right there. Also, your vehicle crossed that fence line." She glanced back, dismissive. "We'll address that later." "No," I said. "That makes you a trespasser now." That's when the mask slipped. "You're being difficult," she snapped. "And stubbornness like this usually ends badly. The development committee has made a very generous offer for your land." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. "Not interested." She stiffened. "You should reconsider. Properties like yours affect surrounding values." There it was. The real problem. My farm wasn't illegal. It just didn't match their brochure. "I'm done talking," I said, turning back toward my tomatoes. "And you should move your car." She left angry, spinning gravel all the way down my drive, tearing up a section I just repaired. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a violation notice showed up taped to my mailbox. Bright, official looking. Excess agricultural equipment visible from residential properties. Fine due in 14 days. I drove into town and showed it to my neighbor Carl, who'd lost half his land to a similar development 10 years earlier. They don't quit, he said quietly. They wait you out. That night, I started documenting everything. Photos, letters, dates, times. I called the county clerk, pulled records older than my father, and confirmed what I already knew. My land wasn't theirs to touch. A week later, I went to see Sheriff Ben Morales, an old friend who'd watched this town change right along with me. He leaned back in his chair after reviewing the paperwork. From a legal perspective, they can't enforce HOA rules on you. Then he sighed. But that won't stop them. What do you mean? They'll pivot, he said. County ordinances, water, noise, environmental complaints. That's where they try to hurt you. So I prepared. Cameras on fence posts. Survey markers refreshed. Water rights recertified. I kept my head down and my paperwork clean. Then, one foggy Saturday morning, I walked out to check my irrigation pumps and found Margaret Linton's white SUV parked sideways across my cattle gate, blocking access completely, while she stood at my property line with 3 county officials, pointing at a drainage ditch that's been there longer than any of us. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about rules. It never was. It was about control, and she thought she'd finally box me in. Standing there in the fog, watching Margaret Linton talk with her hands like she was already delivering the closing narration of my downfall, something inside me went quiet. Not angry. Quiet. Sharp. Focused. The kind of quiet that settles in when you understand this isn't confusion anymore. This is strategy. She'd parked that SUV just right, blocking the cattle gate, blocking access to the irrigation controls, blocking my ability to make any quick adjustments while she stood there flanked by county inspectors, pointing at a thin ribbon of water that had been flowing the exact same way since Calvin Coolidge was president. This runoff, she was saying, voice carrying across the field, clipped in practice, poses a structural risk to retention basins serving Willow Creek Heights. We've received multiple complaints. Complaints, always plural, makes it sound like a crowd, even when it's really just one person with a title and too much free time. I didn't walk toward them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't explain myself. I turned around and headed back toward the barn. That's the part people never tell you about moments like this. The strongest move is often the one that looks like you're retreating. Inside the barn, the air was cool, heavy with the smell of oil and old hay. I climbed up into my tractor, the same faded green machine my father rebuilt twice and refused to sell, even when newer models showed up with cup holders and satellite screens. This one didn't need any of that. It just worked. The engine turned over slow, then caught, settling into that familiar rumble that sank into my chest like a heartbeat I trusted. When I drove back out into the field, the entire scene shifted. Margaret noticed first. She stopped mid-sentence. Her head snapped toward me, sunglasses reflecting the tractor, like it wasn't supposed to exist in her version of events. "What are you doing?" she shouted, already marching toward me, heels sinking deeper into the dirt with every step. I lined up the loader carefully, easing it beneath the front end of her SUV. No sudden movements. No jerks. Just steady pressure. The way you lift anything you don't want damage. "You can't touch my car," she yelled. "This is vandalism." I raised the loader slowly, slow enough that the suspension stretched before the tires ever left the ground. The SUV hung there, awkward and silent, like a prop that wandered into the wrong movie. One of the inspectors stepped back. Another pulled out his phone, thought better of it, and slipped it away. "This is illegal," Margaret snapped. "I will have you arrested." I finally looked at her then. "From a legal standpoint," I said, calm enough to surprise myself, landowners in this state are allowed to remove trespassing vehicles from private property, provided no damage is caused. One of the inspectors, a younger guy with a clipboard and a face that clearly said he did not sign up for this, nodded reluctantly. "That is accurate." Margaret spun on him like he'd stabbed her in the back. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the county side," he replied, taking another step away. I drove past him toward the back pasture, the tractor moving at its blazing top speed of about 15 miles per hour, which suddenly felt very fast as someone watching their luxury SUV sway gently on steel forks. "Put it down," Margaret screamed. "Put it down right now." "I am," I called back. Just not where you prefer. The cows noticed us before we reached the pasture. Heads lifted, ears flicked. A few wandered closer, curious about the strange white object descending into their morning routine. I lowered the SUV carefully into the muddiest patch of ground I knew, right where the sprinklers were scheduled to kick on in about 30 seconds. I'd spent enough mornings out here to know that timing by heart. The moment the tires touched down, the sprinklers came alive. Water arced across the field, soaking the hood, the windshield, the doors. Mud splattered, grass flattened. Margaret made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scream. You can't leave it there. Those animals will destroy it. I shut off the tractor and climbed down. You trespassed, I said. You blocked agricultural infrastructure. I relocated the vehicle without damage. And now you're threatening my property, she shot back, her voice shaking. No, I said, I'm letting nature take its course. Right on cue, old Daisy wandered over. She sniffed the door, then leaned into it, scratching her flank like she'd found the best tree on earth. Mud smeared, hair stuck. Another cow followed, licking the side mirror with slow, determined interest. Behind us, one inspector coughed. Another turned away, shoulders bouncing. The senior inspector, a gray-haired man I recognized from water authority meetings years ago, cleared his throat. Mrs. Linton, he said, we've seen enough. The irrigation system is compliant. The drainage channel is registered and grandfathered. This inspection is concluded. Margaret didn't answer. She stood there staring at her SUV like it was a dying pet. Finally, she turned back toward me, eyes burning. I'll sue you, she said. I'll take everything you have. I folded my arms. Before you do that, you might want to review the footage from the cameras installed around my property. I pointed them out, small, weatherproof, impossible to miss once you knew where to look. They recorded you passing multiple no trespassing signs, deliberately blocking agricultural access during an inspection, and entering protected agricultural land. Any attorney worth their license is going to tell you that you don't have a case. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. She signed the document about 30 minutes later. Mud streaked her suit. Her hair was plastered to her face. Whatever pride she'd arrived with was gone. The agreement stated in plain language that my property was exempt from Willow Creek Heights HOA jurisdiction and that all contact would cease immediately. When I towed the SUV back to the road, the inside smelled like wet grass and livestock, no matter how loudly she complained about the cracked windows. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I received confirmation from the state that my application for historical agricultural designation had been approved. The timing felt almost poetic. The protection was permanent. No rezoning, no development, no loopholes. A week after that, I got a letter from the Willow Creek Heights Development Committee requesting a meeting. I agreed with conditions. 2 representatives. Park at the gate. No wandering. They showed up with apologies instead of threats. Margaret Linton had been removed from her position. Her methods, apparently, had become a liability. They didn't ask to buy my land. They asked how to work around it. Buffer zones, conservation easements, farm-to-table partnerships. Funny how respect shows up once leverage disappears. That night, I sat on my porch with Carl, watching the sun drop behind fields that were still mine, and thought about how close it all came ending very differently. Because the truth is, if I hadn't known the rules, if I'd panicked, if I'd reacted emotionally instead of deliberately, this story wouldn't have ended with cows and laughter. It would have ended quietly, with paperwork, exhaustion, and loss. And that's what scared me the most. What stayed with me afterward wasn't the shouting or the inspectors, or even the image of that white SUV sitting helplessly in the pasture like it had wandered into the wrong ecosystem. What stayed with me was how close everything came to slipping away without a single dramatic moment, because that's how most people lose what they love. Not in a blaze of conflict, but in quiet exhaustion. A few weeks after the so-called incident, life settled into something that almost felt unfamiliar. Peace. The kind where you wake up expecting another letter, another visit, another problem, and nothing comes. No notices, no threats, no cars on my driveway that don't belong there. The development didn't stop. Houses kept going up. Lawns kept getting planted. But there was a line now, and everyone seemed to know exactly where it was. One afternoon, I was repairing a fence when a couple from Willow Creek Heights walked up to the gate. Mid-30s. Polite. Nervous. That careful posture people get when they're not sure how they're supposed to behave. "We heard you sell tomatoes," the woman said. "I did, so I sold them some." We talked for a while. They asked about the cows, about how long my family had been here. They listened, like the land was an inconvenience to them, but a story they hadn't realized they were missing. That happened more than once. The development committee followed through on their promises. A conservation buffer went in along the fence line. Native plants instead of concrete. Walking paths that stopped short of my property, exactly where they should have from the beginning. In every HOA document going forward, my land was listed as permanently exempt, not subject to review, not open for discussion. Margaret Linton disappeared from the picture entirely. I heard through town that she'd moved, that she blamed everyone but herself, that she still insisted she'd been right. People like that usually do. What surprised me was how far the ripples traveled. The county revised its guidelines on HOA expansions, made the language clearer, tighter, harder to abuse. A commissioner quietly lost a seat in the next election after too many people started connecting dots they hadn't noticed before. I didn't plan any of that. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was just trying to keep my gate clear and my water flowing. But that's the thing about standing your ground. You never really know who's watching or who needs to see that it's possible. Carl came by one evening with a bottle of homemade wine. We sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange, then purple, over land that had survived depressions, wars, market crashes, and now, apparently, suburban politics. "People think it was a tractor," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't," I said. "It was the paperwork." He laughed. "That too." Later, after he left, I thought more about why the whole thing felt heavier than just a win. From a legal standpoint, nothing I did was extraordinary. I followed the rules. I documented. I stayed calm. I didn't escalate. I didn't bluff. I let the system work the way it's supposed to, when someone actually understands it. What made it feel extraordinary was how rare that's become. We live in a time where most conflicts aren't settled by who's right, but by who gets tired first, where authority is implied instead of proven, where pressure replaces conversation. HOAs didn't invent that dynamic. They just perfected it in small, everyday ways. This is a psychological trap, built on the idea that resistance is inconvenient, that compliance is easier, that challenging power makes you a problem. And most people don't want to be problems. They want quiet lives, predictable days. I wanted that too, but I also wanted my land. The lesson here isn't that every HOA is evil or that every development is wrong. The lesson is that systems work best when they're questioned by people who understand them, when boundaries are enforced calmly, consistently, and without apology. And maybe the harder lesson is this. Some things don't look valuable until someone tries to take them. Some places don't feel fragile until you realize how easily they could disappear under the right combination of pressure and paperwork. This land isn't just soil and fences to me. It's where my father taught me how to fix an engine with more patience than tools. It's where my kids learned that responsibility starts before breakfast. It's where my grandfather sat in the evenings, quiet and content, watching the same sunset I still watch now. No HOA rulebook could ever measure that. So if you're listening to this and deal with something similar, whether it's an HOA, a developer, or just someone who thinks authority means ownership, here's what I'll say. Slow down. Learn the rules. Document everything. Don't confuse confidence with legality. And don't let anyone rush you into giving up something you know is rightfully yours. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a verdict. Sometimes it looks like a quiet pasture at sunset, a lock gate, and the knowledge that you didn't move just because someone told you to. And I'm curious what you think. Was I right to do what I did, or did I go too far? Should power like that ever be challenged so directly? Or is there a better way? If you were in my place, would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. I read more of them than you'd expect. And if you've got your own story about HOA overreach land disputes or standing your ground when it mattered, I promise you're not the only one who needs to hear it.